1 year as ambassador to India. He's absorbed the country. He's seen the challenges, the difficulties, and has faced them quite well, so to say. I'm being joined by the US Ambassador to India, Ambassador Eric Garcetti. Thank you so much for joining us here. Indeed a pleasure. Let's begin with your experience. It's been a year of beautiful traveling and experiencing India. We saw your video, but also challenges. How do you read into your entire experience?
Personally, it has been one of the most enjoyable years of my life. For me, my family, to see and to feel the changes in India, but also to know the consistency of the spirit of this place and its people. That's why I've always loved this country, and I'm so honored to serve here. And the challenges, of course, there are challenges. But I think if you've been to India over many years or lived here, you really feel the optimism of this moment in so many ways. India's assertion of its place in the world, its kind of extension of what it can do as a force of good in the region and beyond. And the US-India relationship, I agree with President Biden. This is the most consequential relationship of the 21st century. And to be a small player at the helm of that, to guide that as ambassador, really has been the honor of my life.
You're here at a very critical juncture. Elections are underway here in the country. What are your observations? We've seen conversations about development, but we've also seen conversations that could be rather divisive. So what's your take on how the elections are playing out in the country?
Well, before I was a diplomat, I was a politician, 7 elections myself, and I know that things get intense in any election. Certainly we have our elections underway in the United States as well. I judge democracy based also on the execution of democracy, and by that measure, I really have to say I'm impressed with how India will travel to the most remote village, bring a voting machine to a single individual living on their own, and that the Indian voter takes her or his vote very seriously. In the United States, we usually vote one way or the other, consistently. And here, 3 months ago, you might have voted one way, but you go to the politicians and the parties and say, what are you going to do for me this time? So to me, that's wonderful to see. This world's largest democracy, a place where it's so vibrant. And of course, you know, we see the consistency that no matter who is in power here, and I would say the same thing in the United States, our people want a closer and closer relationship, a future together, if you will, guided by 2 diverse democracies. Democracies are difficult to manage, diverse populations are difficult to manage, but they're better than the alternative.
Ambassador Garcetti, we'll talk about the bilateral relationship, but before that, weigh in on what just happened with India and Iran. A Chabahar port deal that was signed, a waiver that US had given for the Chabahar port, and now we hear the deputy spokesperson of the State Department say that there could be risks of sanction for India. Has the mind changed? Has the policy changed in DC? What really happened here?
I can't confirm that it has, and we're awaiting some further clarification on those comments ourselves. But one thing is clear is we know that Iran has been a force for terrorism, a force for exporting a lot of bad things, not just in the Middle East, but other places. And we've been very consistent with generally having sanctions, with some rare exceptions where there's a strategic interest. So we'll wait a further clarification, but most businesses should be aware of those risks of interacting with Iran as it exports terrorism, as it directly attacks another sovereign nation recently, and that should be of concern to all of us. We certainly want to see a region surrounding India that is stable, that is democratic, and adheres to the rule of law, and certainly does not export terrorism, and I think that's a shared concern we both have.
Speaking of terrorism, for India, Khalistan is a real issue. Elements within the United States of America, as also Canada, a real concern. Where do you see the investigations on the murder for hire charges really go? Is there clarity on who has been appointed within India in that high-level inquiry committee that has been set up? Because we have certainly no clarity on that.
Sure. So there's a few questions there, but let me try to disentangle them. First and foremost, our law enforcement has never worked more closely with each other, whether it was the attacks on the San Francisco consulates, whether it's transnational crime that occurs on both sides of the Indo-Pacific, sometimes with immigrants that come from here to the United States. I'm really impressed with the level of cooperation and coordination that has never existed before. Second, there's an ongoing criminal case. I think we've made our position very clear. It's not what people say, it's what they do. And when there's criminal acts, we take those incredibly seriously. But attacks that cross a line, that is also something that is as equally unacceptable. And I hope that both India and the United States are listening to each other more clearly than ever before at the concerns they have for security, for safety, and that the Indian diplomat abroad can be rest assured that we take any threats against them incredibly seriously while we uphold the rule of law in our country as well.
The individual Nikhil Gupta, who US has sought extradition of, do you see him as a critical part of this entire investigation? And do you see that extradition really take place?
Well, based on the indictment, obviously, that's the central person, so absolutely. And while I can't comment on all the details of an ongoing criminal case, I think that that's clear in the indictment that was put forward. Anybody who would threaten to kill somebody in any one of our countries commits a crime and needs to pay the price for that. And certainly countries we have extradition treaties with, just as we do with India and are working on extraditions like in the Rana case, we would have that respect for each other.
Will we see an extradition of Rana because you just mentioned him?
Again, that's up to a court, but all indications are that not only our coordination between our law enforcement agencies working together on this should result in that, and I have a high level of confidence. But I never predict a court before it's done, but I'm quite confident, yes.
And finally, a very important issue that has affected many across the world, particularly we see a lot of them affected in the United States of America. Students across universities in the United States of America now raising a voice, standing with Palestine. But the clampdown and the crackdown certainly do not speak volumes of how US would like to be seen across the world. You have told India when Indian students protested and there was a crackdown, and now we see a similar case in the United States of America. Your reaction to the crackdown?
Well, thank God we live in democracies where people's voices can be heard, where we can disagree, where there's criminal behavior, if somebody attacks somebody there or threatens somebody, obviously those are places where people should take action, any police force, any university, where people are unlawfully someplace where they shouldn't be. That's their right. But it's also the right to have your opinions heard. And I think what people forget is they focus on the conflict rather than the fact that a democracy, people can lawfully disagree, can raise their voices in protest, as opposed to dictatorships where those voices are snuffed out, where you cannot do that. Democracies, as I mentioned, are not easy to manage, but they're so much better than the alternative. So while I see, I was a student activist, I protested things. Sometimes there's consequences that come with that, which is a part of the protest. But in the United States, where emotions are high like around the world, thank God we live in a place where people can disagree.
But these are peaceful protests. Do you think America's image is now being hurt across the world when they see peaceful protesters?
Maybe there's some who would rather have no protest at all. There's certainly countries that have that. But that's not a place I'd want to live. Maybe you wouldn't see people disagreeing with each other, but that's the point of democracy. That's something worth fighting for. That's something worth having and protecting. So no, as somebody who's been in plenty of protests, who's been involved as a student activist, that's our right as Americans and something that we should always protect. At the same time, nobody should be threatened, directly threatened, and there needs to be consequences if somebody is threatened or if violence is ever engaged upon, or if property is seized in an unlawful manner. Those are two separate things. Opinions are protected, unlawful behavior is not.
You're willing to engage both sides of the party should any of them come to power, and how so in India?
Absolutely. You mean it's here in India? We see the strength of the India-US relationship transcending parties in both countries. And it's been amazing to see this election here, just the logistics of it. I mean, it's staggering to see how well India is able to pull that off. But we can't wait to get back to work. And by the way, I'd love to reassure your viewers that during the election, we're doing so much work too. I often say, while the politicians are campaigning, it's a great time to get things done. And certainly the Prime Minister, our President have said, continue this work on technology, on vaccines and health, on students, on education exchange, on military and strategic work. We're doing exercises, we're issuing visas, a historic number, reducing wait times in the midst of all this, looking forward to opening 2 more consulates, hopefully in the next 12 months. It's an unprecedented amount of work, and it's why
2 more consulates where?
Bengaluru and Ahmedabad. So usually these things take years. We're hoping that we can do this in the next 12 months, which would be a record, probably not only just in India, but maybe anywhere in the world.
Thank you so much for joining us. Wishing you the best for the coming year and hoping that there are a lot of the things that you're planning get done between India and the United States of America. Thank you.
It's been a great joy. Thank you.